This is a weird one, but we're gonna go with it because why not? I hate that noise. What happened to Geordie during the encroachment of the anti-time anomaly? A. He began to grow new eyes. B. His visor stopped working. C. He was demoted. Or D. His mother came back to life. It's like, what are we even talking about?
We don't need to argue about this. Obviously,
No, we do.
Welcome to a piece of the action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Greg.
And today we are going to be reviewing The Great Zimbabwe from 2012. Now, this is a Splotter game. I remember last time we did this that I very much mispronunciated those names. Right? Let me see if I get them closer. Yurun and Eurus. Is that close?
Yeah,
Closer
I think that's the
than
first
I did
one.
last time?
I think this is as good as an American is going to get.
Okay. All right. Anyway, Splotter game, 2 to 5 players, 90 to 150 minutes, and we're going to see what Greg and Eric thought about it. First of all, let's go ahead and get into a basic introduction to what the game is about, what its premise is, and a little bit of a basic overview of the rules. Greg, you want to do that for us?
Sure. It's called The Great Zimbabwe, and this is based in the historical Africa, where you are tribe leaders, like kings, I think, trying to build up monuments. That's the premise. I'll let Eric talk about how well it fulfills that. But that's the basic idea. So the idea is actually you are trying to get points mostly through building up these monuments, which are basically just discs on the board. And a level 1 monument will give you like 1 point. A level 2 monument will give you an extra 2 points. I can't remember exact. I should have it up, but I don't. But each level gives you more and more points. So if you got a full level 5 monument, all in all, that whole thing would give you 21 points. So those upper levels are worth more than the bottom levels. And your goal of the game is to match your VR, which this game calls VR, which is a victory requirement, which starts at 20 points. But your VR can go up through your course of the action. So if you never rose your VR and you build 1 level 5 monument, you would win the game because you have 21 points. Your VR is 20 to start. Most likely your VR will go up though. So the way that you do this is there's 3 actions that you can basically take on your turn. You can just throw out a level 1 monument, and you can pretty much throw it out anywhere on the board that you want with some restrictions, but it doesn't cost you anything. That gives you a victory point. The other thing you can do is you can upgrade your monument. So that's works by you're using these resources that are on the board that craftsmen are using. Basically, they're using these craftsmen that are on the board to upgrade your monument. So if you want to go to level 2 monument, you need 1 type of craft that's made from a certain resource. If you want to go to level 3 monument, you need 2 different types. So there's 4 types total. You need 2 different types to get to level 3, 3 different types to get to level 4, and so on. So the interesting part of this game, I think, is the way the distance works. It's kind of like the core of this game. So in order to, like, for example, to use a resource from a craftsman, you have to be within 3 from them. However, you're allowed to use temples or these monuments, yours and everyone else's, as hubs. So if I can, for example, I'm within 3 distance of Eric's monument, and Eric's within 3 of that craftsman, well, then I can use Eric's monument as a hub. And I pay, basically, that's like the UPS of the game. I like to think of it. You pay $1. They're cows in this game. Your money is like you pay 1 cow to the bank to use that hub, and you pay the craftsman for that resource. Anyway, that's the basic idea. There's this whole logistical puzzle going on that you're working out how you reach. Craftsmen are also built by the players. That's your 3rd action you can take. You can build a craftsman and then put them on the board. And there's a whole thing about that where they got to be within certain raw resources, within distance, again, within the 3, and so on. There's a 1 kind of complicated level of that. There's secondary craftsmen, which is a big deal because once secondary craftsmen come on the board, they're basically advanced levels of the first level of people you're starting with. And as soon as they come out, people no longer want the level 1 craftsman. They need the level 2 craftsman. But those level 2 craftsmen need level 1s to operate. So now you shut down all the level 1 craftsmen. You have to use level 2s and so on. Anyways, as you can see, there's like this whole network that's getting built up as thing has to be within 3 distance of each other. That's the basic idea. The other thing I want to talk about is the auction just briefly, because I do think that's kind of an interesting thing in this game. It's a little weird to explain, but it makes sense when you do it. Basically, when you do an auction, you're bidding. And if I want to bid, say I bid 1, and Eric bids 2, and then someone else bids 3, it gets back to me. Now I got to bid 4. If I don't add it to my 1, I'm bidding 4 more. So you basically can do that until people start passing. When people pass, they go last. However,
but by the way, hold on, Greg. You didn't say what the auction is for. So this is for initiative.
Oh, this is for turn order. This is to go for turn order. Yeah. So once you decide to bid something, it actually goes. There's like these plaques that are on the board that each represent one of our kingdoms. And so starting, let's say I bid 1, I put 1 cow on the first plaque, and let's say there's 2 more plaques here. Next person bids 2, they drop 2, 1 in each plaque as you go. And I say I'm going to do 3. Well, I loop back around and I drop 3 in each plaque. So basically, everyone is evenly distributing their bids on these plaques. And at the end of the bidding, everyone gets all the cows that are on their plaques. I believe the game calls this generosity of the kings.
Yeah,
it's kind of like this redistribution of the wealth, because even if you don't bid in an auction, you may get money out of it because people are putting cows onto your plaque. The auction is kind of really interesting, so that's why I want to bring that out specifically. And then the final element I want to bring up is gods and specialists. On your turn, you can always just pick up a god. You can pick up 1 god at any point during the game, and you can't change it. And it's basically just a game-breaking power. Like, you don't need to have 2 different types of resources to build up. You can use the same resource. Or your distance is not 3, but 6. Those are things that increase your VR. And then there's specialists, which is another kind of a minor power that you can get, where you're allowed to like put new raw resources on the board. Or you can turn 2 cows into 3 on your turn or something like that. These are all just different little game breakers that you can pick up. That's the basic idea. I know that's a super high level overview, but that's the general idea.
So let's go on then. We'll move on to talk about the theme of the game. How well did it do when it came to executing this idea of sort of establishing your African kingdom? Eric, you want to speak to that for us?
Sure. First off, I think it's fascinating that this game is not that difficult, but I think it's probably one of the hardest games to describe without like zoning out. Like, I'm listening to Greg talk about how to play it, and I'm like, do I know how to play this game? It's really hard to describe.
It's weird to describe without me sitting down with the components and moving things around.
Yeah, because once you show it, it's not that hard. But like, to describe it, it's like, what are we even talking about? There's a lot of moving parts.
It's so spatial. And this is because we like to avoid on this channel the whole like sit down and teach the rules for an hour.
Yeah, that's not what we do.
But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Theme. Yeah, people actually like. There's not a lot of videos on the Great Zimbabwe, but the ones that I've seen and some of the threads on BGG, like, they rave about the theme. They're like, oh, it's so cool to see this theme of African kingdoms, and I'm like, is this? I think this is, maybe, I don't know if this is performative or not, but it's, but I think this is, if anything, this has less theme than Food Chain Magnate by far, in my opinion. This is basically, Greg alluded to this, but it's basically like Amazon fulfillment game with a 15th century African nations like wrapping paper on it. Like, the theme is not really there. In my opinion, it doesn't. It could have been anything. It could have been like literally like the Amazon fulfillment center of the game. But
by Amazon, you mean the company, not
the company, of course, yes. But I think they're already planning on doing that with Food Chain Magnate. It would have been too close. So I don't know. To me, I don't know I'm curious what you think about the theme of this, Greg.
I agree that I don't ever think about the theme, but it's, if you do some research on it, it's interesting how there is some thought put into it. Like the Great Zimbabwe is like an actual like medieval city that's in Zimbabwe. And then if you look up all the god names, they're all somehow.
Oh sure, yeah, no, I mean it's historical.
Like, I'm sure underneath all of this, there's actual reasons for this. The only thing I think the theme is, even though I never think about it, I guess it's somewhat refreshing to have a theme that's about Africa.
Sure, that is
Also
true.
not about colonialism.
Exactly. I
That's
would
kind
say
of
that
rare.
that is cool.
So
That is very
I
rare.
think even though that's not like coming through for me, props for coming with something a little
It
original.
really feels like it could have been anything, and it was like
But it's
tacked
true.
on. I'm not saying that makes. I mean, we're not judging the game yet. I'm not saying that that's a negative for me necessarily, but theme is not where it's at.
Yeah. No.
All right. Well, what about for both of you guys then? When it came to feel of play, how did it feel playing Great Zimbabwe?
It felt like Food Chain Magnate without the without advertisements and without the what do they call that, Greg? The your business or your chain of people, your triangle of
your corporate structure.
your corporate structure. That's what it felt like to me.
Huh.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, it felt like okay, am I this close enough to get this thing here, to this person, it's almost like
if you could elaborate a little bit for people that maybe aren't familiar with Food Chain Magnate.
So Food Chain Magnate is a game by Splotter, spelling, about getting fast food to people. And so it's all about distance, and it's about maps, and it's about advertising to those houses. This is almost like that, the negative version of that, where it's like it's not about getting food to people, it's about getting resources to your monuments. It's kind of what it feels like to me. But with less moving parts, because it doesn't have the aspect of like the advertising, like who wants what, it doesn't really have that. You can't manipulate that anyway. It just kind of is. And it doesn't have the card game aspect of designing your corporate structure. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Food Chain Magnate, while it's on our list, is not a personal go-to of mine for other reasons, though. I'm just saying that's what it feels like to me.
I mean, so you're saying it sounds kind of like just you're saying it's like a Food Chain Magnate light.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, Greg,
that's what it felt like to me.
I heavily disagree with that. I don't think it feels anything like Food Chain Magnate, actually. I mean, there are some, obviously, there's going to be some similarities between the games in that. But yeah, I get totally different vibes out of it. But for me, Great Zimbabwe.
It's your African roots. That's
it. Yeah. It's 100% a logistics game. That section of the game, anyways, is a logistics game. It's all about learning how to basically in Great Zimbabwe, there is this whole network of delivery, and you putting down one single monument creates a new hub, or you putting down one craftsman changes how that web looks. Like if you think of it like a spider web, and I can go this way, and but you can completely change that whole configuration with very easy, simple drops onto the board. Very, very simple changes can just change all that math. So I think that's kind of what it feels like to me. It's just that logistics game with a fairly hefty auction system on top of it. That auction is actually a pretty crucial aspect of the game. And I would even argue this is it's funny, Food Chain is definitely I don't want to compare this to Food Chain the whole thing, but it's definitely an economic game. But Food Chain is more about, the money is more of a victory point system, because you don't spend out that much money in Food Chain. Yeah, your salaries in the beginning, but once it gets going, it's mostly just VP. But here, there's a true like investment aspect to it. I feel, especially in the beginning turns, you have to figure out, where am I getting my income from, right? How do I spend my cows? These are very, very precious in the beginning, and how do I get it so I can start getting an economy going here, so I can start getting enough cows to do what I need to do. So I would say, yeah, for me, it's a logistics game with an auction system on it and a fairly decent dose of economic game in there too. So.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, describing kind of I mean, it doesn't sound, what you're describing to me doesn't sound completely unlike, and maybe this is just like the Splotter DNA running through it, but it's, if you're talking about like a complicated and very sensitive web of interactions, and especially interactions where a key piece of how they work and whether they're gonna work is like location based on the map and stuff like that. That doesn't sound completely,
I mean, I think
doesn't
if you
sound completely
boil,
removed. But I mean, we're talking feel of play, so that could all be true.
yeah,
But
I think if
on the
you
board, it doesn't feel
boil,
that way.
if you
Huh?
boil a lot of things down, you can make anything
Yeah.
sound like anything, right?
True.
But I can't sit here and describe. That's a really, I mean,
Sure.
it's a personal thing. But for me, they tickle very different parts of my brain.
Mhm.
I don't. It doesn't feel like food chain light to me. It's what the part of my brain that is exercising during this. And there's some overlap, of course. But I mean, it's
Right.
different enough that I'm not like, this is food chain light, and I don't think of it that way at all.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead then. We're going to go ahead and move into priorities and strategies. What are some things that, if you're picking this game up for the first time, some things you might want to keep in mind as you start to get familiar with the rules? Let's go maybe to Greg. Do you want to start us off with this?
Yeah, just some first game things to think about. I do think at its heart, this is an economic game in a lot of ways, and especially in the beginning few turns, you need to figure out where your income is coming from. That's one of the first orders of business. So there are some gods that can help with that do provide income. One god just gives you 2 extra cows per turn. One allows you to put an extra plaque down so that you're getting more cows during the auction phase. There's different ways to do it. And I would suggest if you're going to go that route, get them early because they're going to give you more bang for the buck, obviously, the earlier you get them. The herd card is a craftsman. I think new players shy away from that, but I actually think it's a pretty powerful card. It gives you 5 VR.
Specialist,
like
not craftsman, right?
What's that?
Specialist, not craftsman, right? Herd.
I'm sorry, yeah, specialist. Yeah, it's a specialist that basically allows you to put 2 cows on it, and at the end of the turn, it just gives you another cow. And you can do that up to 6 cows. So if you have 6 cows, you can get 3 extra cows. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's like an investment, basically. And in the early game, that can be quite a bit. So if you have enough cows to invest early on, it's an option. The other way to get money, though, is through craftsmen, because craftsmen are things you put on the board, and people will have to pay you to use the craftsman. So, and you can set prices for that, by the way, 1, 2, or 3 cows for people to use your resource. And it's a good way to get income, and it creates a dilemma, I think, when you're doing it, because it does give people easy access to resources. It allows them to get victory points, but there's not much you can do about that. I think when new people come in this game, they get this, it's this typical thing where they want to, like, I'm going to set up a craftsman, I'm going to put my monument next to it, and then I'm going to just use that craftsman. But the same thing happens in food chain, where they think they can just put down their advertisements in their restaurant, just they don't realize that you're interacting with 1 billion people, with a couple other people, and you're in each other's face the whole time. So you cannot put down a craftsman and then use that only on your monument. And the reason being is because people can always drop a monument anywhere they want on the board. So wherever you put a craftsman, someone can just drop their monuments next to it anyways. So avoid that whole thing about like, oh, don't touch my craftsman, because that's how you're going to make money. So there's a whole dilemma about, like, you don't want to make it too easy for people, but you do want people to use your craftsman so you can make money. But anyway, that's a good way to make money too, is learning how to use the craftsman wisely. If you have not a lot to do in your turn, don't hesitate dropping down a level 1 monument. You're going to need a few of those anyways. You're not going to win the game with 1 level 5. I just don't think that will work. You're going to need 4, 5 of those probably. So you're going to have to drop down level 1s eventually. So whenever you have a good opportunity, drop 1 down, because that's going to increase your opportunity. And then in future turns, you have multiple places that you can start building up. Like, okay, well, he took that thing over there, but I have a monument over here going, right? So do drop those. If you don't like the way the board works, you're looking at the board and it's like, this person's getting too much stuff over here, or whatever, change it. It's very easy to change this map. Dropping a secondary craftsman is a pretty big deal, and that will completely just change the whole math of the board. So you're always got to be thinking, if I don't like the way this is working for me, how do I change it in a way that's beneficial for me? And this game gives you a lot of tools to change that math. Some of the gods too, just to go back to the whole income thing, they only make sense to take early on. So I feel like if you don't take them in the first round or two, then they basically become dead to you. So do think about that, and don't be afraid of VR. Think of VR as an investment, victory requirements. Don't be worried about pushing that up a little bit early on in the game. It's an investment. You should be able to think about, well, this is going to raise my victory requirement up, but will the return on that be higher in victory points? It's an investment, and that it's just like with money, you shouldn't be afraid to spend money to make money. So it's the same thing with VR. Don't be afraid of it. Use it as a tool.
Okay, cool. I have a couple of questions thinking about this, but I think I want to hear what Eric has to say first, because maybe he'll answer some of them. Eric, your thoughts on priorities and strategies?
Yes, I will no doubt answer all of your questions, as I am a Great Zimbabwe expert, having
Yes,
played
no doubt.
only a handful of times. So, priorities. I've got several like subheadings here that I think are important, and the first one is the map, and the second one is early income, and I think they kind of go together, kind of paired with what Greg was saying. But I want to talk about the map first. Before you even, it's interesting, I was watching a playthrough of this, and the first turn, they spent like 10 minutes on initiative, on bidding for initiative, and at that kind of, I was like, yes, that's what this game is like. This game is like, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but this game is about analyzing as far as you can go. It's, as far as you can think out, analyzing it out. And that kind of boils down to the map, because you need to look at the resource distribution. So visualize where people are going to put their craftsmen, because the rule of 3, right? You have to have a craftsman within 3 spaces of the raw resource on the map. So you can look at the map before anybody's played anything on it and be like, okay, somebody's going to put a wood carver there, or an ivory carver. I don't remember the names, but somebody's going to put that there, because that's like within 3 of like 3 or 4 wood spaces or whatnot. So you can see where they're going to go. After that, you can visualize where the upgraded craftsmen are going to go, because now basically, like, the point is, before you even play the game, try to look at the map and see where are the valuable spots, not only for craftsmen, but also for upgraded craftsmen. Because, and we don't need to get into the rules of the game on how that works. It's not complex, but like I said, it's almost impossible to describe without showing you on the actual map how upgraded craftsmen, they work in a chain, right? So you got to have the raw resource that goes to the craftsman, and then the craftsman has to go to the upgraded craftsman, yada yada yada. So there's that, and then that pairs with, so being able to visualize, if you're able to think out to how this map is going to look at the end of the game, you've got a huge advantage. Early income pairs with that. That is so important. And there's several ways to get that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but you didn't mention this as far as income is concerned, but you get income automatically for your monuments at the end of every turn.
Yeah, you get income equal to your highest level monument.
Right.
So if you have a level 3 monument, you get 3 cows.
Right. Okay. So there's several ways to get income. Greg mentioned the herd card. I'm going to talk about that later a little bit. I have a hot take on the herd card. But there's also figuring out where a really valuable craftsman is going to, figuring out where the valuable craftsman can be. If you're going to try and get income by having other people use your craftsman, you really need to win initiative. I would say that very, very rarely do you want to, it's almost always better to go first in this game. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I think it's always a good idea. If you can afford it, it's always best to go as early as possible. So that's one way to get money. You can also try for lots of small monuments, or one big monument. One big monument is tempting. Again, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, because one big monument will get you more money in the income phase, but it has a lower ceiling. Shooting for one big monument has a lower ceiling, whereas starting with a bunch of small monuments, it's not going to get you as much income early on. You'll need to figure out some other way to get income. But in my opinion, spoilers, that's a better route. And then there's certain god choices, religion choices that you can make. Okay, so those are the first two. Examine the map, figure out your early income strategy, and then when it comes to initiative, learn to check your opponent's money, your cows, before you start bidding. It's almost, like I said, it's almost always better to go first, but it might be okay to go second or third if the players ahead of you in initiative don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of cows to spend. They can't do much. If they're winning that initiative right, but don't have as much power to modify the board, it might be okay. So get into the habit of checking your opponent's income before you bid on initiative. And then the fourth priority is to learn about, I listed it as blocking plays. It's not really a blocking play kind of, you can't block people in this, but you need to check what people need in order to improve their monuments. And if one player, for example, has easy access to multiple resources, then it might be a good time for, as an example, to build a secondary craftsman. I don't know if Greg mentioned this, but once a secondary craftsman is built, it drastically changes the flow of the game, because no one can use the lesser craftsmen to build monuments anymore. They can't use that resource anymore. So it changes the dynamic, makes things much more expensive, almost twice as expensive. But that's one strategy. Like check what people need. If one player is really just kind of taken off, try to mitigate that somehow, lower their ability to make easy points. Might be a good idea to build a secondary craftsman, or take some other action that changes the supply demand curve in your favor. And then finally, and this has kind of been a through line through all of this, is think long term. It's easy to over focus on making one monument big right now, but it's better to figure out how to boost multiple medium-sized monuments during the end game. But you gotta plan that out, right? You can't just say, well, I'm just going to build a bunch of medium-sized monuments in the hope that I'll be able to boost 3 of them in the end game. You got to know that you can do that, and you can if you really sit and like ponder the map and figure it out. Okay, 2 hot takes. I think the herd card is a trap. I don't think it's worth it, because when you go with the herd card, you're basically not playing the same economic game as everybody else. You're not building craftsmen. So you're saying, I'm gonna use my little card, and I'm gonna like put my stuff out, and I'm gonna like build my herd. But that's the downside to that, is that you're not doing something else in the game, and that something else is getting involved in the craftsman economy that is on the map. I think that's a big downside. So I think herd can be useful, but don't overly rely on it. And finally, there's a religion for Zango. I think Zango is a scam. The Zango, I got this right, Greg? Zango's the one that reduces your VR by 2?
Yeah, the one that I've won with the most. But go ahead.
Don't do that. Don't do what Greg does.
It's true.
He's playing with morons.
Zango's one of my favorites. I go with Zango all the time.
Don't pick Zango. If you're gonna pick Zango at the very end of the game, when you know that like everybody's do. Okay, yeah, okay. So like right when you're like at everybody's kind of neck and neck, and you haven't chosen a god, like don't choose a deity until the very end. Then Zango might be worth it. But honestly, like I feel like the god powers are so good in this game that it's I think Zango's a scam. But those are my hot takes.
But so just to be clear on my Zango strategy, it's not because I think he's powerful, because I don't actually think he's all that great. It's because I go through the whole game not knowing which one I want to pick. And then I'm like, well, I might as well pick Zengel. And I like trying to do tight games where I don't raise my VR. So I do end up taking Zengel a lot, but I agree. But I think they're fairly balanced. I'm gonna disagree with the herd card though. I think the herd card is. In fact, I always find beginners run from it. So I don't think it's a trap. I don't think our beginner goes, "Oh yeah, VR +5 to get 3 cows." I don't think beginners look at it that way. But I don't
No,
think it's
I'm not saying
something.
that's the problem with the card. The problem is that you're not engaging with a
No, I
longer
know.
term money strategy.
Sure, but when you say trap, to me that sounds like it's an enticing thing for someone who's not familiar with the game to do, and it's not as good as it looks. But I
Okay.
think it's the
It's a
opposite.
scam. How about that?
I think it's the opposite. I think it doesn't. I don't think new players think it's good, but it's better than it seems, because I think, and I'm not saying take it every single time. It's definitely not.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
mean,
like
you
an
didn't take it
automatic
last time. I
take.
think it has very specific uses. I'm not saying it's horrible.
I do, but I'm thinking if you are in that situation, for example, I think if you're in the first game and you don't get to be in the auction and you get an extra cow from the auction because you didn't bid anything, and now you have 4 cows, you can get 2 extra cows off of herd on the first turn, and then you can
So
get
I was
9.
thinking about this. What do you think about this strategy? Use herd early and get the deity that allows you get the UPS deity. What's the god's name?
I don't remember the names, but yeah, the guy who gives you a cow. We call him the UPS guy, but
And then just
he's
like
the one that gets basically
spam level 1
normally.
monuments everywhere.
Yeah, normally the money that you pay for monuments goes to the bank, but if you have that god, you get the money.
So like, what do you think about that? Like, get herd. This is like what this is total noob strategy here. Don't do this. Don't do this, guys. Don't do this. But like, get herd early and then use your cows to buy like spam level 1 monuments everywhere with that deity, so that everyone's using your hubs.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You keep saying you're not interacting with the board, but you can place level 1 monuments for free.
But you're not interacting with the craftsman is
You
like
don't
the
have to interact with
primary.
the craftsman.
No, it's possible, but it's like trying to win in Food Chain Magnate without any waitresses.
No,
Is
it's
that
like trying to win in Food Chain Magnate without marketing, which I win all the time with new players. Because new players come in and they think they have to market, and they over market, and then I just react to their marketing and take all their food.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. You don't have. I mean, you probably want to be involved in some craftsmen, but I don't think you have. If everyone else is building craftsmen, just use theirs. So it's. I think you don't need to be building your craftsman on your turn every single time on the first.
No, there is that, and that is actually an important thing. Don't rush the craftsman. I think that it's
so
you need to play craftsmen strategically.
Yeah, so you get 4 cows because you didn't bid anything in the auction. You got 1 off your monument, off your plaque. That's 4 cows. You get the herd. You now have 6 cows in the very, very first turn.
I know, but you
and
then
the
got anything else on the board.
You can turn those 6 into 9, and you can still put down your level 1 monuments, which you're going to need anyways eventually. And now you're coming into level 3, turn 3 with 9 cows. You're way ahead of the game on that. You can invest those pretty well.
I don't think so. I'm just saying, like, I think that later in the game, people are like bidding 13 cows for initiative. It gets crazy, and you can't keep up with herd.
Those early cows,
like, yeah,
are worth more than late cows because you invest those cows. But we don't need to argue about this. Obviously,
no, we do.
We're the great Zimbabwe expert. So
the great cow debate.
No, but I think that actually gets to like an interesting part about this game is that there's, even with noobs, there's a lot of cool strategies that you can dig into on this.
Yeah, so you guys kind of touched on both of the points I was going to bring up. One was that, Eric, to your point, that since you can, before anybody's played anything, you can look at where the resources are and kind of figure out where it would make sense for craftsmen to go. A question that would bring to my mind, kind of a la Food Chain Magnate and advertising, is it better to place your own craftsmen there, or is it better to plan on leeching off of other people's? But it sounds like that's sort of to be determined in the game. Yeah. And then the other question I had about the gods and in general, I guess I just wondered, do you guys have any hot takes on this idea of these game breakers in general in board games, where they have a core thing that's going on that has some level of difficulty, and then on top of that they bring in these sort of ad hoc, whether it's a god that you pick, or whether it's a wild card that you draw or something like that. Do you like that? Do you not like that? Does that tend to go awry, Eric?
I have thoughts. We talked about this in our what's that stupid, you call it a beer and pretzels game, Greg?
King of Tokyo.
Yeah, King of Tokyo. King of Tokyo is about like gotcha kind of. It's a dice chucker, but it's also like a cool powers kind of game. And there can be, and I think what I said in that review is that I'm glad that those games are short. Because game breaking powers, the thing is I disagree with, I think Greg was maybe being a little hyperbolic when he said game breaking. I don't think the gods are the deity powers.
No, they don't break the game.
Breaking.
I don't mean it like they break.
But kind of outside of the normal paradigm of the.
Well, yes, but
Right.
I do think that they're balanced. I do think that they're balanced, and
they're balanced, and because everyone gets one. You have a game breaking power, but so does everyone else.
Maybe you don't have to choose one, and that's a really important part. You can wait. You can choose the timing of when you get that. That's a very strategic thing to add to the game. There is something about the gods is that once you choose one, that's it. You don't get to change it out. You don't get to get rid of it. It's almost like that's your flag, that you've planted, and now you have almost kind of a baked in strategic path. I think the god kind of the deity that you choose limits your stratagems that you can potentially win with, but they are very powerful, and everybody gets one, and the timing is important, and I don't think that it's game breaking. In general, to answer your question, Micah, I don't particularly get a lot of enjoyment out of gotcha cards or like take that games, unless they're really brief and like King of Tokyo.
Okay. Greg, anything to add on that or not?
I think we're out of strategy and into things I'll be talking about in the good and bad section.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's go ahead and go into the good and the bad. What did you guys like about the Great Zimbabwe, and what could it have done better? We'll start with what you liked, and we'll start with Eric.
I liked the Great Zimbabwe. I thought it was a good game. I think it's easy to learn. It's one of those easy to learn, hard to master type games. So, I enjoy those. I think, Go is my favorite game. Very easy to learn, very hard to master. That's the point in its favor. I really like the clever mechanics with regards to the initiative. That's a cool mechanic, the generosity of the king mechanic. It does two things. It allows you to bid for who goes first, but it also, it's not a catch-up mechanic, but it is it's a way to redistribute some of the wealth. If somebody really wants to go first, they've got to spread their cows to the other players. That's a really cool mechanic. The other cool mechanic is the VR, the victory requirements. Sure, choose this really, really powerful god. Sure, choose this really powerful craftsman or specialist. But now you've got to get 7 more victory points.
Craftsman too. They also raise your VR. Craftsman.
It's a really cool mechanic. Everything you do other than just like dropping a monument is going to slightly bump up the number you've got to get to win. That's cool. I really like the choices of deities to worship. There's a little bit of randomness in the sense that I think 4 are taken out of the stack. Is it 4, Greg? So there's a small number that are taken out.
I think it's 4. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, it's around 4.
You don't play with all of them every game.
No,
so
you don't.
Very, very slight randomization, but they're very impactful, but they are optional, and I like that. I think it's I don't know what the play time. I think when you've got to also, I think it plays. No, never mind. I was going to say it plays better at higher counts than Food Chain? I don't think so, now that I think about it. But I think it plays shorter. At least in my experience, it plays shorter, and it still gives you all of the nice crunchiness of a Splotter. It's very accessible. How about that? It's a very accessible Splotter.
90 to 150 minutes is what it says for on BGG. You guys think that's accurate?
I think if you've got a bunch of experienced players, yes, that's accurate.
Okay. All right, Greg, what did you
Greg,
like?
do you disagree? Do you disagree
No,
with that timing?
I think 150 feels long. Even I think
because we played like the first game we played went really long, as far as you're concerned.
Maybe I very rarely do I have these games. Maybe you're thinking 5-player, but very rarely do I think these games go over 2 hours, even with newer players. It's a pretty quick game. Okay. And Food Chain can go 3 or 4 hours. So can like Antiquity can go 3 hours. Roads and Boats can go that long. I think this is the shortest of the Splotters, of the big Splotters, anyways.
Yeah, was it you one time that told me you felt like this was sort of like the intro Splotter, the gateway Splotter?
Look at that. Point number 1 in my good section.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go to you then. What did you like about it?
Yeah, Splotter Gateway. That's the first thing that's on here. So when I say Splotter, I haven't played all of them. They got a lot of really weird light games from early on in their career that I've never played. When I'm referencing Splotter, I'm referencing the big 5, as some people think of them: Roads and Boats, Antiquity, this Food Chain, and Indonesia in the middle should be there. Soon to be Horseless Carriage for a 6. So out of those are the ones I have not played Horseless Carriage yet, of course, but out of those 5 that I have played, this to me is easily the gateway of them. And it's for multiple reasons. It is. I do think it's shorter than all those games, so it's easier to parse. It's got the easiest set of rules. I can teach this in probably 20 minutes. I think it takes to teach this game. It's even the components. So like all the boxes from Splotter typically are these big old boxes or just full of components. I mean, Roads and Boats looks like a tuxedo came in it. It's such a humongous box. Antiquity, I can't even fit in the same box, and it's twice as thick as this game. Horseless Carriage is even thicker than that. And Food Chain, it fits in a thin box, but it's stuffed. It's stuffed, and I need poker chips on the outside of it. Great Zimbabwe comes in a little thin box, and it doesn't even flip the whole thing. There's like air in that box, which is crazy to me for a Splotter. So the fact that it's got so few components, it's really easy to set up. That just makes it much breezier feeling. It's not as opaque. I think that's the big issue. A lot of people approach other Splotter games, and I see a lot of people bounce off because it's hard to get your head wrapped around the strategy. They operate in a different way, but Great Zimbabwe, I feel, is one of the easiest to even early on start grasping the strategies of the game. So I just find that to be more friendly to some players. It's not as fiddly. That's a big one to me. Most Splotter games get really fiddly, especially in the late game, where there's just so many little pieces and components, and there's so many things you got to keep track of. There's some of that here. I'll return to this, but out of the big 5 Splotter games, this is definitely the least fiddly. So all of that makes it kind of a breezier game. But that being said, to move on to my next points, I don't think it's sacrificing much strategy or depth. I think you're still getting the same level of depth, strategic depth, as you get in the other Splotter games. And because of that, I almost think of this as Splotter's most elegant game that they've made. It just feels like one of their most complete and compact, brought down to its finest, to the smallest level they could have. We keep talking about Food Chain because we just reviewed that not too long ago. There's all these cards, there's all this text on it that you got to read for all these little employees that you can hire. There's none of that in this game. There's no like cards of text. You got the god cards and the specialist cards, and that's it. Everything else is just very simple components. But it's still a very interactive game. So let's talk about some of why it's still deep. It's a very interactive game. That's one of my big things I love in a game is for it to be interactive. I always talk about that. And this interactivity in this game it's a shared logistics puzzle. And there's various things that interesting decisions that go on there. So when you're looking at, like I said before, there's like a spider web, this whole the math of how everything works out. Uh, and when the math is in your favor, you can upgrade a monument, right? Everything's working well, everything looks good. Okay, now it's when it's cheap for me to do this now, I might as well because it's kind of opportunistic. But when the math is not in your favor and nothing is working the way you want to do, now you got to sit and think, all right, I need to change this. What can I do to change this board state so that it becomes in my favor? And it just gives you a lot of tools to do that with. So you can build a new craftsman. That's a really easy one to do. So if you don't like what's craftsmen are there, build your own. Secondary craftsman, it feels like someone's dropping a nuclear bomb on the table. When those go down, it really changes things up dramatically. People are over there just getting all those cheap resources on the side of the board over here, and you put a secondary craftsman way on the other side of the board, and now what they were doing went from like $2 to like $8. That's possible, and that the fact you have that much power is one of the things I love about Splotter games in general. And this is where it does share the DNA of its other games, is how cheap they make it for you to change the game dramatically. It's just so easy for you to do that. And another example of that is new monuments. They're free, 100% free to drop down a new monument. And that changes the math of the board. They don't make you pay for that. You can never put a craftsman too far away because you can always put a monument next to it. So the thing is that puzzle is constantly changing. It's always in flux. It never settles down. You're like, okay, I'm on a good ride. I'll just ride this out for the rest of the game. Because that puzzle is constantly moving and shifting back and forth because it's so easy for players to change the math on the board. So I love how it just kind of constantly just keeps you on your feet. It never gets stale, the puzzle throughout the game. You can't just like ride your success. And then things we haven't talked about too is like, the water, and there's water in this game. We haven't talked about that. But water are basically these big slip and slides. So when you say 3, but you get this big water patch, you go 1, 2, but 1, hit the water and you slide all the way to the other side, and that's counts as only one movement and jump off the other side. It's like a teleporter almost. But there's specialists that let you drop new water on the board, drop new resources on the board. There's just so many ways to change the math of this game that keeps it constantly moving that I love. Back out of that a little bit, another part of interactivity, the auction. I love the auction in this game. I love auctions in general, but I find the auction here to be particularly interesting. It's crucial sometimes, the auction here. It's almost an auction game with a logistics puzzle on the side. Sometimes it feels that way to me. So it's I just like auctions. So that is inherently interactive. Auctions are. It's kind of have a semi-closed economy, which I've always appreciated. Some money goes out to the bank, but a lot of the money is just being shifted back and forth between the players because you have to pay them for craftsmen, and especially if you have that god out that takes the UPS funds. It's just your cows are in the generosity of the king section. You're just redistributing the wealth among players. So it's not a completely closed economy, but there's a lot of cows changing hands, and I do like those kind of economies. Okay, to get to the gods about the game breaking powers, I love asymmetric powers in game. So I appreciate that here, and the reason why I like it here is it makes it interesting. Every time you go, you can try a different one, and it does kind of change the way you approach the game. So there's enough in there that every time I can take a different god and be like, okay, well, now I have this power that no one else has. What can I do with it this time? And I don't think it's not like a gotcha card because unlike many of the other Splotters, there's actually no randomness in this game at all, and there's no hidden information. 100% open information game. So that's another thing I like about it. And finally, it still Eric keeps talking about this long-term thing. It still manages to be a strategic game, a strategy game. That's my favorite kind. It's not tacticless. It's not without tactics, but it's heavily focused on that strategy thing, which I really enjoy. So those are my goods.
Awesome. Well, you guys have had a lot of praise for this game, and everything you've said so far has sounded pretty positive. So I am kind of curious to see what you did not like about it. We'll go back to you, Greg, to start us off with what you think it could have done better or what you'd have liked to have seen differently.
Yeah. So as you may or may not know, Splotter is one of my favorite publishers. my second favorite game behind Go is Food Chain Magnate. And if I were to rank the Splotters, this would be number 2. So I do love this game. But we're all talking about bad, so I guess I have to explain why this doesn't overtake Food Chain for me. And just briefly, basically all those things I said I enjoy about Great Zimbabwe, how it's interactive and stuff like that. Food Chain just has a lot more teeth, and that at the end of the day I like better. So it's more cutthroat. It's got a lot more edge to it. I find it's more interactive. You're in each other's face a lot more. So I like that about Food Chain. That doesn't mean it completely replaces this, because, like I said, that this game being more accessible is a huge plus, and it does give me a completely different puzzle. But at the end of the day, that's the only reason. So that's basically not a negative. It's just me comparing it to a game that I like better, because I do love this game. If I were to come up with any kind of negatives to think about, if you're thinking about this game, I did say this game is not as fiddly as the other Splotter games, but it's still got some fiddliness in it. And especially when the secondary craftsmen come out, that math on the board can start becoming tricky. And you're finding yourself constantly having to recalculate your routes. And because the routes in this game are not clearly drawn out, there's some overhead, I think, with tracking how things move around. There is that. It's not like roads and boats where you're drawing physical roads on the map. You're counting spaces, and from here to here, okay, well, this goes from here, this from here. It's a lot to maintain, so it can become hard to read. The final bad, I guess I'll talk about, is I do think this is best at 3 or 4 player. The box is 2 to 5. 5 is pretty good. It starts getting a little hairier because you get more players, but it's still pretty good. 2 is also good, okay, but I want to talk about 2 a little bit. 2 is actually a fun game. It's different because it becomes 0-sum, but I do want to point out I don't think the auction is that interesting. As is typical with auction games at 2-player, I do think it's missing something in the 2-player game. And this was particularly noted when I was playing one of my friends. We played a few 2-player games, and she enjoyed it a lot, but then we went and played a 4-player game, and we played the auction for the first time. She's like, wow, this auction is actually really good. It's because auctions don't always work at 2-player. So I still think it's an enjoyable 2-player game, but I do think when you're playing 2-player, the auctions are just kind of there. They're not as interesting as they are at higher player counts. Just something to think about. That's it.
Okay, cool. Eric, what about you? What do you think the Great Zimbabwe could have done better?
So I'm curious, where are the tactics in this game, Greg?
I don't know.
I'm genuinely curious, because I was going to say, like all Splotters, this is like an all strategy and no tactics game.
No, you're right.
This is...
I didn't really think that through when I said that. It just feels less like there's some in here, but I'm trying to think where. I don't know. I feel there's a little. I don't know. Maybe
I suppose not. Timing. You could say like the timing of choosing something could be a tactical choice.
Yeah, maybe the auctions are kind of a little more tactical. I don't know.
I think those lean strategic, and that's like, again, Greg and I divide hard on Splotters, right? So for I can respect what they're doing and still not necessarily enjoy the ride. And like all Splotters, I think this is a so heavily strategy. If you are into just pure strategy, like the rest of the Splotters, that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get any tactical choices here. That's a design choice, so can't really knock it, but I don't think it's necessarily for me. I think because of that, I mentioned how like sitting and staring at the map for a long time will pay off. I think that's another way of saying that this game maybe lends itself to some AP, but again, that's a Splotter thing. Like, I think Splotter games tend towards analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
And
let me comment on that real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
thinking about it since you're talking about it right now. Because I've always said that Food Chain Magnate feels like it's a giant tanker ship moving through the ocean that you're slowly turning towards a goal. It's just a slow-moving ship, and that's because you're building up a corporation. But the feeling I get in Great Zimbabwe is not that at all, which is why it feels different to me. it feels more like a constantly changing interactive web. That's how I've been talking about it, right? And so I do feel like you kind of got to react to those changes. You don't have your own little corporation you're using to move through the environment. You're interacting with this network that you're constantly changing. And so in my mind, that just feels more reactive and more tactical a little bit. I still agree that's mostly strategic, but less so than Food Chain in my mind.
I agree. I think it's less strategic than Food Chain, but only on the merits that there's less things to. I think there's less dials to turn in this than there is Food Chain Magnate. But I do think it's all strategy. That's, like I say, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I read something about how this game was like it was all about changing a supply and demand curve. I thought that was a really interesting analogy, where it's, you look at you might have to make a choice that hurts you. Just make sure it hurts you less than it hurts everybody else. It's kind of like changing that curve so it's more slightly in your favor. It's, again, like I said, it feels like Greg uses logistics. I think that it's more like it is logistical, but it's more about supply and demand. It's more, I think it's an economic game at its heart. Who needs what? That's how you win. Like, figure out who needs what. This is we're getting it. Like, I need to talk about the bad. Okay, so the other bad thing I would say is the lack of strong theme and the look. This is pretty much my downsides on all Splotter games. I'm not particularly wowed by their thematic content or their artistic choices. I think Food Chain Magnate is the best in that regard so far. I haven't seen Indonesia. I don't know about that one. But I think Food Chain Magnate has a certain vibe it's going for. Even then, doesn't really pop, but that's a taste thing. So those are my bads.
Yeah, I'm curious because you keep talking about Food Chain this whole time, but you have played Antiquity.
I like Antiquity.
You like Antiquity more than this?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that in the final, but yeah, I do.
Okay,
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Just to push back a little bit on the graphic things, because Splotter gets this a lot. There's
Sure,
so many threads constantly about people complaining about the looks.
I don't want to complain about it. I'm not saying I'm complaining about it necessarily. It's just a taste thing, It's I get their aesthetic. But it's just for me it's like one of my 5 categories is like, would you take a picture of it? Does this look pretty?
Yeah.
To me that matters.
Yeah, but I just why one of the reasons why do I think they keep things fairly simplistic though is because their games can get so hard to read. There's so much things on the board. You need to make it sure it's as clear as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a lot of extraneous art, that becomes difficult. It's hard. I know that sounds crazy, but like that one little thing having to decipher icons, that little millisecond, you do that dozens of times in a turn because you got so many things you got to parse. That adds up brain power.
The cognitive load.
The cognitive load gets
And you mentioned it like that's real. That is a real phenomenon, especially for me. Like, I'll sit there and I will like stare at the board and I'll be like, I can figure this out. And then like 7 minutes later, I'm like, no, I'm done. I'm just gonna do this thing. Like if you can get through that, if you've got the patience for it. Again, go watch our Food Chain Magnate video. It was the same kind of thing for me. I was like, I think it's a great game. I just don't have the patience for it. It doesn't interest me enough to put the time into it. Kind of a similar thing here.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of hard when, like you said, when you understand they're making a deliberate aesthetic choice to do it. So it's hard to knock a purposeful decision that is doing the thing they intended to do, but I know what you mean.
But on top of it, I enjoy the aesthetic anyways. I just prefer simpler looks in general. And it's funny because you say you like Food Chain better. I always thought from a purely art perspective, I've liked this game.
Really?
I don't know. I always find it pleasing to look at. It's the colors are nice. I don't know. I've always found this.
Well, I think Food Chain's the kind of tone that they were going for, that like 50s vibe.
It drives the theme more for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, now we're going to go ahead and get you guys final thoughts on the Great Zimbabwe. Is there anything you want to say about this game that you have not already said? What did you rate it? Would you recommend it? And does it go on either our 10 or 25 game shelf? Let's start with you, Eric.
So I think it is a good game. I think it is certainly the most accessible Splotter in terms of learning curve. I disagree that it is more forgiving or opaque or less opaque than, say, Food Chain Magnate. I think the appearance of still, it's that maintaining of still being in the game, that like there's a maintenance that of where the game allows me to feel like I'm still a contender when I've lost. I've lost 4 turns ago. I know that in Food Chain Magnate. I don't know it in Great Zimbabwe. I think it's a little it gives you that lifeline.
It provides an opaqueness to your ineffectuality that you like.
No, I'm saying this is a kind of like I would just say it's not a good or a bad. I'm just saying that, like, I've heard some people say that it's a more forgiving Splotter. I don't know about that. I don't think it is necessarily that forgiving. I just think that you just don't know you're losing as soon.
Right.
I think it's more forgiving, but you have to consider that's in this relative to Splotters.
I know, of Splotters.
So it's already
I don't think it's as forgiving. I think it's about as forgiving as Food Chain Magnate. It's just that with Food Chain Magnate, it's like, it's obvious because I can't do anything this turn. What do? I can't make any food. I can't do anything. I can't deliver anything. Whereas in Great Zimbabwe, you can do stuff. You can always put a monument down or whatever, but you don't know you've lost. It's certainly, in my opinion, it is certainly not the best Splotter. I like both Antiquity and Food Chain Magnate better than this, but it is a better choice for those who maybe want to play a Splotter game with their friends, but maybe they know their friends might not be all about that strat life, and they want to play something that's a little more accessible. This is the game. It's a good game. Okay. I give it a 6.5. 6.5.
6.5. Okay, and we'll talk about the shelf in a minute. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise here. I love this game. I think on our top 100 video, this was number 4 for me. I mean, I gave it a 9.5. Just
that's
a
super
hair
high
lower than Food Chain, which I gave a 10. And on top of it, second game in the history of a piece of the action to get Greg's stamp of approval.
I was wondering when that would come back.
Which I only give the games that which I didn't give it the Go, even though Go is my favorite game of all time, only because this is not necessarily my favorite games, but all the games that I think meet what I always talk about in games, and that is interactivity. How cutthroat is it? Is it strategic? Is it all those things that I always throw out as I love in games? If I see a game hitting all those check marks, that's when it gets Greg's stamp of approval. And I think this is doing that. Yeah, everything I just talked about, it's just I'm actually surprised that Eric said Food Chain like that more. I thought for sure we were going to be inking Food Chain off for this on our shelf.
I said when I played this, after we were done playing it, I was like, I think I like this. I think this is my favorite Splotter. And then I was thinking about it later, and I was like, no, I think I like Antiquity best, of the ones I've played, and I like Food Chain after that, and then I think this is third for me.
That's interesting because I think Antiquity might be my least favorite Splotter, possibly. But anyways,
I mean, that goes with our theme, right? Like we're
you guys can always meet in the middle at Food Chain.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, it's a great game. It's got everything I love in a game, but it does it in a shorter period of time, and it's a little bit easy. I feel like it's easier to get into for most players. So all of that definitely keeps it on my shelf. I think it's providing a very different puzzle, even though, yeah, the DNA is there. Splotter has a definite DNA they share among their games. But one of the things that always impresses me about them is they tick all the boxes that just speak to my gaming soul. But every one of their games feels drastically different to me. You know, I don't know how they do it. To me, this feels very different. It's still a different puzzle, but yeah, I love it. It's a great game. If you've ever thought about getting a Splotter and you've been hesitant because you think they're too crunchy or deep, I personally feel this is the more accessible one.
Is this in
But
print,
Eric,
Greg?
no, Splotters are never
That's
really
going
in
to be a
print.
problem.
Yeah, they're never really in print, but they tend to reprint their popular titles every 5 or 6 years. So, Food Chain's usually always in print though. But yeah, anyways, you know, it took them 8 years from Food Chain to print Horseless Carriage, a new game. You know, they're not the fastest moving company in the world. I like that about them personally. They're a small company, but if it is in print, it's a good accessible one. Oh, but hey, just shout out to the two. You can play this on online. What's it called? Board Game Core, I think it is. There's an online version of this game you can play if you really want to try it for free. Yeah, play.boardgamecore.net. So they have Great Zimbabwe there to try.
All right. So what about the shelf? What do you guys want to do? 10 or 25?
For the 10, I was prepared to pull off Food Chain for this, actually. I thought for sure Eric would like it better, but if Eric doesn't, I'd rather keep Food Chain on it. So,
Do you want to? Are you pitching for any other kickoff?
what
For
would you
the 10?
consider?
Nothing.
Our 10 game shelf is getting pretty solid right now. And I feel like the variety of games that we have on here, even though I love Great Zimbabwe, I feel like there's nothing, you know, I'm going to keep a variety of games on here. Yeah, there's nothing I'd be honestly vying to kick off for this.
Okay, good. I mean, there's several things I would consider on the 25.
25
Yeah,
for sure.
let's go to the 25 then. If you,
I definitely kick something off 25.
what do you want to kick off the 25?
What wouldn't I?
Yeah, I think
Let's
there's
see.
quite a few options here, in my opinion.
I'd get rid of Seven Wonders probably. I do think this is a good game. It's a lot of these things are about, like, especially with the 25, we're not particularly concerned with the rules of our 10 game shelf. I don't think.
The reason I like Seven Wonders is just, as always,
Player count.
It plays the player count. When you have 6 or 7 people over who don't want to do a party game, we don't have many options on this shelf, actually.
Sure.
Um,
I would consider getting rid of Puerto Rico for this, although I think I liked Puerto Rico better.
Puerto Rico's pretty solid. I would
I like
consider it. If I were to pick one now, honestly, it'd be Dune Imperium.
Yeah, I was gonna say no on Dune Imperium. I think that's too. Yeah, I understand. I understand the weakness of Dune Imperium. It will go eventually. I just don't see it going now.
I see.
Um,
I don't know. You know, a 25 game shelf is starting to get.
It is actually. Now that I'm looking at it, it's a little harder to choose.
Starting to get more solid. I don't. You
what
know,
about-
Puerto Rico's not a horror. I wouldn't be crying over Puerto Rico. I
Love
feel
Letter,
like they're
Love
both
Letter.
like. This is obviously a heavier game, but they're both kind of like that strategy.
That's kind of what I was thinking with Puerto Rico.
Thinky game wheelhouse, and I do like this game better than Puerto Rico. Man, Puerto Rico's such a good classic.
I should have. What I should have done is pulled up my ratings for these games, because I think I rated Puerto Rico better than this. But you know, things change, and over time, like, I know that this is not a new game, but there's kind of like a hotness because I just played it.
You don't want to kick off Ticket to Ride? I mean,
here's another thought.
I would kick off Tickets to Ride in a moment.
Here's another thought. I know it's not equivalent games, but that doesn't matter usually. I have very little use for the mind being on here.
Okay. I'll take that bet. I'll take that bet. Yeah, me too.
Kick off the mind for it feels like bullying the mind around from Great Zimbabwe at it, but
it does. I'm just a little bunny rabbit.
it's like,
I mean, the thing with the mind, if you go back and watch our review on it, it was like a trick, right? It was like,
yeah,
it was a one-trick
fun
pony. It did a
time,
thing. It's fun,
but it's not like something I want to just play.
It doesn't have strategy or
kind of a one-trick party game.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm happy with that. Yeah, let's kick off the mind.
Okay. Cool. Well, so goodbye to the mind on the 25 game shelf and the 10 game shelf. Man, if Greg, if you're rating a game a 9.5 and it can't crack the top 10, you know,
Yeah.
it's gonna be a while.
No, and just to
Right.
be clear, the 10 game shelf is not my top 10 games.
Right.
No, I
that's
know.
Yeah,
I know.
we want to
So,
make
you
that
know,
clear. So that's what I was alluding to. With the 10 game shelf has rules behind it, and it's been a while since we posted a video. So, the rules are: this is a shelf we have to share between us. If this was like, if we had to share a shelf and this is all we had, these 10 games, what would they be?
And I need a bunch of games that, depending
to
on the
accommodate
situation
different
and
people.
who's over and different gamers, I need different games to match different situations.
Yeah,
So it's
you're
more
sort of
variety.
assembling the best Swiss Army knife of games
Exactly
that you can. Yeah, not just your
If you want to know
favorite.
my top 10 games, go watch our top 10 video.
Right.
Yeah, cool. All right, so I think what we really need to do is review another Splotter game. What do you guys think?
Well, I
Sure.
mean, if we as we're filming this, I mentioned I got a YouTube notification that Heavy Cardboard was doing a playthrough of an unboxing
Unboxing it. They just got it.
of Horseless Carriage, and hey, like we've been reviewing Splotters. Like, how many videos do we have, Micah?
This is the third one.
This is our third Splotter. That's
Doris
a
in the room,
significant
just
percentage
FYI.
of the number of videos that we've made is Splotter. So I mean, Greg's your boy. Like, you guys need to support
How
him.
did Heavy Cardboard get one delivered directly from
And
Splotter?
we didn't.
Well, and Jorun, Dolman, and Joris Viersinga. I even tried to do your last names, right?
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah, so it raises some questions, certainly.
Yeah, he identifies
but-
as German.
But I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure though that our
Dutch.
plan is that is going to be. our
Dutch.
next
I didn't even know that.
They're Dutch.
They're Dutch. I apologize.
Yeah, we'll have to edit that out too.
Yeah, cut that, Micah.
Okay, so
I think, but do we have any idea when we're getting that?
It's stuck in customs.
So
Last I heard, the rest of the world has got this except the U.S. So it's stuck in customs, and it's going to go down to Oregon, where Fun Again, which is shutting down the logistics department.
Bummer.
So hopefully I get it in the next month.
When that comes in, we're gonna like fast track it, right?
I'm gonna my goal is to get that played as much as I possibly can.
We should
So I
have
feel
a we
comfortable
should have a
doing it.
secondary game lined up. I have a suggestion, Greg.
Yes.
I would like very much to play Imperial Struggle with you.
Yeah, we should do that. Do it.
okay.
I love that game. Spoilers, but I love that game. It's a great game.
All right, so coming next, probably Horseless Carriage and
That's the goal.
or Imperial Struggle, if Horseless Carriage continues to be stuck in customs. Before we go, if you have not subscribed to us and you like all the work that Greg and Eric like all the work they're putting into these reviews,
Several minutes of my time today was spent prepping this.
Right.
waking up.
Thinking about games.
Yeah. If you like that, then subscribe to us to support us. We appreciate it. And until then, this has been a piece of the action. I think I know. I think I know this one.
What do you think, Micah?
I think he started to grow new eyes.
I think this one was.
It was like it was reverting back to like an earlier time in his personal timeline or something like that, right?
I think
It
you're right.
would seem like such a weirdly specific time anomaly to demote him.
And that's what I think that's a hilarious inclusion. It went backwards to it happened with Picard, I guess, when he went
Suddenly-
back in time and he was a lieutenant or something.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
that was a Q thing.
I know
That
it
was
a cute thing.
That was cute.
Well,
pick
so was
line.
the Entitime anomaly.
Well, I
kinda.
know, but that was like putting him in Picard's body. But like to be de-aged, just wake up one day, and go suddenly I feel like an ensign. Seems like weird. But yeah, I think his eyes started growing back because like they were
Let's check.
becoming new again or something.
That is the ring of yesness. So yes.
All right.
Okay. I also remember Geordie's incident with Roe where they were out of phase, right?
Yes.
Trying to think if there were any other
Geordie
technical
episodes ever.
malfunctions that happened to Geordie.
Well, a lot of things happened to Geordie. I feel like
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah.
common one.
Yeah.
The
There's
only
the one
thing
where
that
there was
didn't
a
happen
time
to
of
Geordie,
slow.
well, we
Wasn't
can't
it
talk about
Geordie?
that.
Who was the one that was involved where they were like passing through walls and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
one with
that was
Ensign
Row.
Row.
Oh, but then there was one where everything was okay. I'm thinking of something else. Then
And miraculously, they didn't phase through the floor.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It doesn't work on feet.
Even
grab-
as like a,
Grav
even as
plates are made of a material that prevents
even
that
as
from
a,
happening.
as a young teen, I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know about that.